So right now there are wildfires raging across much of Canada, and the smoke from those wildfires is being driven south into the United States by the jet stream. If you're affected by that smoke, you should stay tuned for this episode. We'll have plenty of facts that can help your flock stay healthy during these wildfire smoke events.
Welcome back to the Poultry Doc Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Blayne Mozisek. Each week, we bring you board-certified veterinary guidance to help your flock thrive. Let's head to the coop.
Welcome back to the Poultry Doc Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Blayne Mozisek, and today we're going to talk about smoke and wildfires. We're going to talk about exactly why your flock is more vulnerable than you and what exactly to do about it. So I'm sure you've all heard the saying, the canary in the coal mine. That exists for a unique reason. Birds have a really unique respiratory system, very different than ours. So it takes some understanding of the respiratory system in order to figure out why these birds are more vulnerable to smoke and particulate matter. So the avian respiratory system is very different than ours. They have fixed lungs versus us, who have lungs that expand and contract. So I breathe in, air goes in the lungs, I breathe out, comes back out. This bird, and all chickens, all birds, breathe in, that air comes through the trachea, down into the lungs, and completely through the lungs, and down into air sacs that go into the abdomen, into the bones, actually around the neck. So there's multiple air sacs within this chicken's body, and they act as sort of like a bellows. So the air goes in there and then is pushed back out. So you'll notice when a bird breathes, it's more abdominal. That's because it's pushing that air out back through the lungs. And so that double exchange of oxygen is an adaptation for flight. It's evolution and has allowed birds to pull more oxygen out of the air. Now there's a downside to that. One is those mechanisms that we have, like cilia and other mechanisms to push out particulate matter, don't really exist in the air sacs. They're pretty much avascular, so there's no blood flow. They're very thin. And some of those particulates can settle into those air sacs. It's very difficult. It takes a long time for that particulate matter, like dust and smoke particulate, to get out. So I'm sure you've all heard the saying, the canary in the coal mine. Well, there's science behind that, and it goes back to that avian respiratory system that we talked about. Birds passing air twice through the lungs are much more sensitive to noxious gases like carbon monoxide and the methane that was found in those caves. So what's actually in smoke that makes it bad? Really, smoke is fine particulate matter, and that's actually so small that it's able to make it through those filtering processes of the lungs. If we think about our lungs, as we breathe in and air goes further into our respiratory system, into our lungs, goes through the trachea and the bronchi and the bronchi into the air sacs. As it goes farther and farther, it becomes slower and slower and allows particulate matter like dust to fall out. So blow your nose and on a dusty day and there's a bunch of dust in there. It's the mucus and the hairs and all those mechanisms that allow filtering of those particulates. That doesn't really exist in the avian respiratory system, at least to the degree it does in ours. So many of those fine particles, especially smoke, are small enough to make it past the lungs and pass into the air sacs, where they then fall out and could potentially cause issues like air saculitis or other irritation that can bring on things like mycoplasma, for example, or other secondary bacterial infections like E. coli. So stressors like smoke can bring on respiratory disease. Think of mycoplasma, we mentioned that earlier, right? Stress events like moving new birds in or extreme weather changes can also cause those, but so can smoke. So this is one of the reasons why we want to protect our flock from this fine particulate matter that encompasses smoke. So what are some of the things that you should watch for in your flock if you are in an area that's affected by this wildfire smoke? So obviously, open mouth breathing, gasping, struggling, or labored breathing are all signs, but some of those also carry over into just hot days. Like right now, it's 100 degrees here in Texas. All the birds are open mouth breathing. They're all panting. So it's a combination of things. If you see labored breathing, like associated with like tail bobbing or maybe even nasal or ocular discharge, those can all be signs that the smoke is having a negative effect on your flock. So what are some things that you can do at home to take greater care of your birds in these conditions? One is obviously protect them from that fine particulate matter, protect them from the smoke. Now that may be hard to do in an outdoor environment, but keeping them more isolated. So inside, remember these particulates fall out of the air. So on not so windy days, just keeping them indoors can be helpful. If you've got a fan, it's not a bad idea to put some of the material that's in air filters, for example. So you can buy the matted air filter material and put that behind your fan. Or if you're an engineer of such, you can actually blow or push air through an air filter into the coop. And that's going to allow that coop to be to have more filtered air and to remove some of that particulate matter. And so those are some of the few things we can do. On really bad days. So when we talk about air quality index or AQI, when it's 150 plus, for example, and you do have birds that are struggling with maybe respiratory disease that they had before, potentially older birds, just birds that may have a respiratory challenge, the best thing we can do is bring those birds inside into like an air-conditioned environment where that air is filtered through that air filter material. So not all of us can bring them inside, but even just inside the garage, right? If you're not in an area that's just too hot and your garage stays relatively cool, even that protected air inside a garage or a bathroom, that may be a better place than outside. And again, these are on the days that air quality is very poor, and we want to do everything we can to protect, especially those birds that are more vulnerable. So remember, if you're faced with smoke right now, it's important that we protect our flock, and there's a few easy things that we can do. One, it's best to probably keep them isolated. We're in central Texas. It's very hot right now. We're not affected by the smoke. This isn't the largest coop, but if you've got an area where you can kind of keep them penned in, again, remember these particulates fall out of the air. If we can protect them from that, that's a really basic thing we can do, so limit access. If it gets really bad, remember we're gonna monitor that AQI, the air quality index, not just the haze in the air, but the AQI. And if it goes over 150, that's especially important for those vulnerable birds, and we need to protect them. So think of the birds with respiratory disease, or maybe those that are older, any birds that are potentially more vulnerable to stress, maybe those with chronic respiratory disease. Bring them inside in an air-conditioned or at least a more clean air environment like the garage, where it's relatively cool, right? We don't want to overheat them. That can be very important too. And also a fan with a little filter behind it can be a great way to push in some filtered, more particulate-free air into the coop if you've got that ability to do that too. So thanks for joining us. This is poultrydoc.com. I'm Dr. Blayne Mozisek. We'll see you next time.